Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Jenny's Self-Care Lab. I am pretty excited about today. So today is Transformation Tuesday, and we're going to be talking about a topic that I've been a little bit curious about for some time, and I've had to do a significant amount of research because there's actually not enough research on this, at least particularly from an African perspective. So I've had to kind of go around, be on the net, you know, kind of just like looking and scouring for pieces of information that I could bring together. And what I also found was that for a lot of the studies, there were differing, not necessarily differing opinions. I think there were a couple of very consistent findings in the case studies that had been done. And then there were maybe areas where there was a little bit of like difference in opinion. And then there were, of course, other studies that also shared very openly and vulnerably that there's so much more to learn in the space, and the reality is some of the case studies have been really small. Some of the case studies, as you would with a case study, have been very much restricted to a particular area or particular region, i.e. some of the studies, a lot of them have been done in North America, not so much outside of North America. However, I did find that despite them not being done in Africa, or at least very few of them being done in Africa, we can still take some lessons from the ones that have been done in North America. However, it is always important that we keep in mind that our skin is such a skin in general is just such a multifaceted topic. And just keep in mind that there's a lot more to skin than just what I'm about to share from the research that I found, right? So I am talking today about how does race, ethnicity, or ancestry impact our skin. I've just been interested and I thought to myself, well, maybe there's something to be learned here, because if we better understand how our skin, from the basis of just like being who we are, how it like differs or how it is similar, it will certainly impact how I select products. It will certainly impact just my knowledge and my decision making around my skin, and even just understanding what to look out for, right? So something may not necessarily be a particular issue for you today, but it might be important and helpful for you to understand that it could be an issue down the line. It is something to just take note of, or even just understanding which parts are just natural, right? Like which parts are just like, yeah, that happens to Black people, girl. It's not that deep. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I'm really excited to unpack this. Please bear with me because there are some pieces that are jargon, and I'm going to try and pronounce everything as best as I can. But if I mispronounce it, I'm very sorry for that. But also bear with me because there is a lot of jargon and notes. And so I might be looking at my book a few times just so that I make sure that I'm not getting this wrong and I'm not sharing incomplete information. I have a ton of sticky notes. Like it is insane. Um, and that is just not even, I've got like maybe 4 pages of research, but I've tried as far as possible to narrow it down. In fact, the 4 pages are the narrowed down version. So, but I've tried to narrow it down even more. So I want to try and pick out all the important parts and we can share those. Get your cup of coffee, get you a cup of tea, get you some juice, get you some collagen mix, and let's get into it. Let's start off with saying that much of the conversation around ethnicity, race, and skin often begins with color and pigmentation, which is 100% a valid starting point. I think just because one is the first thing that we see. And then secondly, being that it is a huge contributor to the conversation in and of itself. And we're going to dive into a piece around melanin, which is this pigment that we often are seeing with our naked eye. And so we're going to start with that. But in this conversation or in this video, we're going to be covering a number of other things, because while skin color or skin tone is an important part of the conversation, it's not the only consideration in terms of how to ensure the health of your skin and just better understanding the characteristics of your skin as well as the factors that influence it. and how to better understand how to care for it, right? So there are other considerations to skin health. There are considerations around the aging process. There is also considerations which I found to be very interesting, which I'm not really going to delve into this video. We're going to do it separately, but there are some considerations around the kind of treatments you might be wanting to have for your skin. So there are certain treatments that are better suited for certain ethnic groups, and then others that are not so well suited for those, or where you just have to exercise a little bit better caution before you get particular treatments. And so part of what we aim to do here, or at least that what was my aim, was I wanted to not only understand the differences because I found it interesting, but to understand the differences so that I can make better decisions about my life, my skincare, about things to look out for in terms of skin health, about things to expect in terms of my aging process, but also just so that I could just be well informed. So let me start by saying that aging is a beautiful thing. I think aging is a beautiful thing. I think it is a privilege to be able to grow older. And I, for one, can definitely say there was a time when I was younger where I wanted to be forever 16, then I wanted to be forever 18, and then I wanted to be forever 25. But while those were amazing years, and I think a lot of us kind of want to stay young as we grow older, I do appreciate that as I kind of turned 30 and I thought there would be something drastic that would happen when I, on my actual birthday when I turned 30, and nothing really happened except that I had a fabulous time with my friends. But I thought there would be this click, this difference, this major kind of occurrence. And there wasn't. But what I do know is that I have found my year 30 and my year 31 to be very amazing. I've loved every moment of it. I love the maturity that it comes with. I love the difference even in my life and who I am and how I think and how I move. And even in my body, I've learned to embrace those parts of me that perhaps as a younger, woman or lady or girl did not quite appreciate. And so I, for one, have absolutely loved aging. We are all going to become wrinkly and saggy at some point in time. Now, of course, we're not going to complain if we can maintain our youthfulness and our radiance for as long as possible, just like Nia Long and Pharrell and Morris Chestnut and Morgan Freeman. Now, I don't know. The difference with Morgan Freeman is that he actually did grow old, but it's like he grew old and then he stopped because he was like, I'm done. This is where it stops. Like he is aging, 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 and then he was like, deuces, I'm out. Like that's it for me. And then he just stopped aging altogether. And it just like he remained consistent because for as long as I've been alive, he's looked exactly the same. But those people that I've rattled off are some of the people that can enjoy the benefits of something like melanin, which we're going to dive into just shortly. But all of this is to say the aging process is natural. The aim for me, at least from my perspective, is not necessarily to say we shouldn't age or that we should prevent aging and that kind of stuff. We're all going to get there at some point or another, whether it takes 20 years, 30 years, 2 years, 5 years, whatever the case may be. Eventually, we're going to all get there where we start to age and where we get wrinkly and saggy and the skin isn't doing what it used to be doing anymore. And it's just kind of hanging on the bones, and that's okay. And that's okay. I think sizoba right. I think the nice thing is like we must live our lives fully while we can. Embrace the fact that we can have radiant skin while we can and beautifully, you know, unsaggy, unwrinkly skin when we can, and then also embrace once those wrinkles start to show. In fact, in my first skincare analysis that I did in Seoul, one of the first things that the lady who did my analysis said was that I'm a smiler. And at the time, I wasn't smiling at her because I was just, in my element doing whatever I was doing. And she said, I can tell you're a smiler. I was like, how did you know that? And she was like, because your eyes, the wrinkles around your eyes are mostly because you're a smiler. So I've got smiling wrinkles, which are these like upturned wrinkles over there. And so I was like, yeah, like, and I've heard of this saying where people are like, oh, like, don't smile, it gives you wrinkles. No, I want to have smile wrinkles. I want to be the kind of person who has smile wrinkles because I'm a happy galley. And so anyway, all of us are going to age. It's a beautiful thing. There's love and there's joy in aging. And so the aim shouldn't be to halt any natural processes. The aim should be to understand our skin, to love our skin, to embrace the natural processes, but where possible, to allow ourselves to go through those processes with radiance, with grace, and with a little bit of sparkle and glow where we can. So yeah, let's get into it. So some of us have the absolute joy and benefit of aging with grace, is what would typically the magazines would say. And that is because we have something that is called or at least that I like to call a built-in automatic sunscreen or sun lotion. I know it's probably not the right term to use here. These are not the right phrases or terms to use for this. However, I like to think of it as a built-in sunscreen, a built-in protector. And that is when we're talking about this thing called melanin. So let's better understand melanin and unpack it. The function of melanin is to absorb harmful UV rays and protect our skin from sun damage. When you think about melanin, you can think about melanin as our skin's first defense against UV rays and sun damage. Melanin gives our skin color. It gives our hair color and it gives our eyes color. The more melanin you produce as an individual, the darker your hair, the darker your eyes, the darker your skin. Something else that I found interesting was that the amount of melanin in your skin is determined by two things. In fact, three things, I would argue, but the internet said two things. The different papers said two things. Those two things are your genetics will determine how much melanin is in you. And then the second thing is your exposure to the sun will also determine how much melanin there is. And we'll understand the second one more in just a few seconds as we go through kind of unpacking melanin. But I actually thought, I read another paper that spoke about it's not just your genetics of mom and dad, but it is also the genetics of your ancestors and how much sun exposure they had, which I thought was interesting. I didn't unpack that more in terms of I didn't do further research on that. It's a much longer paper that I would have to read. There are special skin cells in all of us that produce melanin. These skin cells are called, I don't want to mispronounce this, melanocytes. Okay, I hope that's right, melanocytes. And these melanocytes exist within the epidermis, which is basically there's three layers to the skin. There's the outside layer, which is the epidermis. And then there's the second layer, which is the dermis. And then there's another layer underneath that. The top layer is pretty thin-ish. The second layer is pretty thick. And then the bottom layer is a little bit thinny, cushiony as well. So the special cells that we're talking about, the melanocytes, they exist within the epidermis, which is this top layer, which kind of makes sense because that is where the sun first hits. And so if you're going to have protection, this built-in sunscreen, this built-in protector, this built-in soldier, it's going to be on the top of the skin, right? On the top layer. And so these special skin cells basically turn the skin darker when the skin is exposed to UV rays. What that means, in other words, is that when exposed to the sun, the body produces more melanin. Okay, these special skin cells, the melanocytes, they create more melanin in the body to protect you from the UV rays. So there are people who are born with these already, and as they get more exposed to the sun, melanin creates more, the special skin cells create more melanin, and so it continues to try and protect them. But the nice thing with having melanin is it means from the get-go, you already have some basic protection against UV rays, which does come in handy. It comes in very handy because then you get to look like me along forever. You don't age. So this is a natural process. These skin cells creating more and more, producing more and more melanin is a natural process. Generally, Caucasians or people with less melanin in their bodies will have earlier onset and greater signs of aging. So they'll see much more wrinkles will be more visible, sagging skin will be more visible, and all of this will happen perhaps much earlier. When you start to look at different ethnicities, races, ancestries, then you will notice that, like, for example, Asians, will tend to not have they will have less signs of aging. So, i.e., like their wrinkles and skin stays firm for much longer. And when they do start to age, it is a little bit less visible, whereas for a Caucasian, it will be more visible. And then, of course, you get like Black people who their aging process, I mean, Black don't crack. That's for a reason, okay? They literally people with darker skin tones will typically just look younger, just more youthful, radiant for a long time. And so, yeah, that is melanin. It protects us from UV rays, and the special skin cells create more melanin, the melanocytes, and over time, this continues to protect us. Just to double tap on the melanin conversation, when you think about the kind of products, okay, if we connect this back to skincare, when you think about the kind of products that you're using in your skincare routine, this is not a question of, so just to clarify, when I'm talking about how does race, ethnicity, and ancestry impact skin, this is not to say, oh, like I don't know, like a Black person doesn't have to wash their skin with with a cleanser, or they don't need to moisturize, and a white person needs to moisturize, and a Korean doesn't need to moisturize. That's not the case. Everybody needs to clean their skin. Everybody needs to moisturize. Everybody needs to SPF. What this is saying though is that perhaps when we start to look into our skincare routines, particularly some of the more nuanced treatments and special extras that we're adding in there, we might want to consider some of this information. And also, even when you think about your basic skincare, like your cleansers, your SPF, your moisturizer, for example, you might want to consider getting something with a little bit more protection when what is kind of like the basic characteristics of your ethnic group or your race or ancestry. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that we're completely forgetting that all of this information and these studies, there are nuances to them, right? We're looking at information that has been definitely tested. However, it is on certain groups of people in certain regions, and it is also at a genetic group rather than at an individual level. So, of course, at an individual level, you really should just understand your own skin and how it reacts and how it behaves, and then respond to that rather than simply taking this as like it's not a blanket approach. However, it is good information to know. People with higher amounts of melanin will typically look younger for a little bit longer, which is great. Love it. Asians, I actually didn't expect this. All of the papers I've read have been very consistent, is that Asians have more melanin than Caucasians. Okay, makes sense. However, though, then I thought to myself, okay, as somebody who is mostly in East Asia and people here are very fair-skinned, what does that mean? Like, do they also have as much melanin? Like, are you telling me Opa has that much more melanin than a white person? Apparently, yes. Apparently, yes. Because if you've been to Malaysia and Singapore, like, look like they have melanin. But if you've been to East Asia, at first glance, to the naked eye, you're like lacking melanin. No, that's not the case. Apparently, Asians have an increased amount of melanin, including melanin producing cells, so the melanocytes, and generally they have more melanin than Caucasians in even the fair-skinned Asians. South Korea, Japan, China, Asians have pigment producing cells that tend to be more sensitive. Now, these cells tend to be more sensitive to ultraviolet light due to the fact that the Asians typically will have a weakened skin barrier. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. Because their skin barrier function is very weak, they tend to just be more sensitive to like environment, pollution, and that kind of stuff. These cells are easily stimulated, which means that whenever they are irritated, there's any kind of skin irritation, any inflammation, whether it be pimples, rash, scarring, scratches, cuts, like whatever the case may be, any kind of irritation to the skin, these skin cells are easily stimulated and form pigmentation just like overdrive. That I found interesting because I was like, maybe that is why, I mean, in South Korea, You could go out in the morning for a walk and the sun is not out, and people are like, I'm pretty sure they've put on their sun lotion, even though I don't see them putting it on. Like they're very pedantic here about sun lotion. They've got hats on. They've got masks like covering their faces. But like one of those, like, I don't know, like people who run and hike and stuff, like covering their faces, those masks. And then they're wearing sunglasses, they're wearing caps, they've got an umbrella, they're wearing those sleeves, the ones that you wear when you're like walking outside or hiking so that the sun doesn't burn your arms. Like, I'm like, the sun is not even out. Now I know that even when the sun is not out, that you still need to wear sun lotion. But they take it to the next level. They're like, I don't want the sun to even smell me at this point. Not even see me, smell me. So I think part of why there's such a huge, which I do appreciate and love, is that there's such a huge culture around sun protection here. And I think one of the reasons is that there may be some understanding that like they're more prone to pigmentation. And particularly one of the things that came up was when you talk about their skin barrier function, the skin barrier function is actually strongest in people with darker skin tones. So Black people tend to have a stronger skin barrier function. And what that means is that where your skin barrier function basically protects you from the environment and pollutants and just any external factors or stressors. And furthermore, it also helps with retaining with the loss of water, right? So how much water you lose from the skin. Now, when your skin barrier is weakened, basically you become more prone to scarring and scaly skin, dry skin, just rough, discolored skin. The reason being that you're not, efficiently protected from harmful things in the external environment. They tend to create products that are very soothing and calming to the skin. They tend to use natural ingredients so that they're not using harsh active ingredients on the skin. Now, this doesn't mean the products don't have active ingredients, because they do, some of them do, but there are quite a lot of like vegan products, just like a lot more careful consideration when creating skincare products around making sure that it is not irritating to the skin. Because when we talk about external factors that are irritating to the skin, that may also include the skincare products you actually use, right? So anything that would come in contact with your skin from above, like from the top, outside in, um, is basically an external factor. And that includes the kind of products that you're using on your skin. So they're just a lot more sensitive and considerate of the kind of products that they're putting on. And I also love that there's a huge consideration around creating really, really good sunscreen. And I know there's obviously like really good ones from overseas as well. Like I loved Eucerin. I used to use Eucerin quite a lot. I did find it to irritate my eyes because I think just the skin around my eyes is very sensitive. But nonetheless, in terms of like the rest of my face, I really, really loved Eucerin. Two things that Asians do very well that I could appreciate was meticulous sun protection, very key. And secondly, sensitive, non-harsh ingredient skincare products. Also love, especially for somebody with sensitive skin. Like as Black people, I think, which is quite interesting, there's a separate part I'll talk about where it talks about Black people and how, or at least people with darker skin tones, how we are also sensitive in certain ways, like our skin is sensitive. And so I think part of why I also quite like Korean skincare is because it almost like factors in my sensitivity without me thinking about it. Now, not necessarily the same kind of sensitivity. However, the fact that their skincare is around soothing, calming the skin, considers sensitive skin quite a lot. It just kind of, it works, right? It works in my favor as well. Did you know that apparently, I read this in one of the papers, 90% of skin changes associated with aging are due to UV exposure to sunlight? 90%. Isn't that wild? And this is one of the things where I'm like, I wish I had known earlier when I was growing up that like using sun lotion was so important. When we consider the structure of skin, we have to consider things like moisture levels. We have to consider the skin barrier, which I spoke about briefly. the thickness of skin and the likelihood of sensitivity, right? Which is why when I spoke about like Asians and the pigment producing cells, the melanocytes, part of what we spoke about there is their skin barrier being weak. Now, there are three layers to the skin. Now, the epidermis on top is basically our security guard. That's where the melanin special cells are. That's where we, it's our protective barrier. It helps, like as I said, with retaining moisture and hydration. So just like the loss of water. And then it makes new skin. So this is where, as usual, like if you go for like, for example, micro needling, and your skin starts to like regenerate and create more new skin. Like that's the epidermis. The dermis layer is maybe about 90% of the entire skin altogether, meaning if we were to think of all three layers as like one thing, the dermis makes up 90% of that one thing. That's how thick it is. That is where you have your collagen production and elasticity or elastin. It is responsible for the nerves that help regulate our temperature. And so the fact that you can feel when something's hot versus when something's cold, those nerves, dermis. And then it also helps with sweat glands and oil production and a couple of other interesting things. But these are kind of the stuff that stands out. And then when we talk about the hypodermis, the cousin to the bones and the muscles, because literally that is where that connection between bones and muscles is. It is that last layer where there's also connective tissue. And yes, there's also a couple of other interesting things there. But most skincare products don't reach the third layer. There's a lot of skincare products that don't even reach the second layer, right? Most of them just kind of like chill out in the epidermis. There are a few ways, treatments, products that do kind of seep into the dermis, which is that second layer, but most products typically epidermis is where they play. But one of the reasons why skincare is such a broad topic is because I always try and emphasize this on my Instagram is that like it's not just about the skin products that you're using. The skin products are very important. Understanding yourself and your skin is very important. Understanding your hormones, especially as a woman, very important. The things you eat, moving your body, like a bunch of other things. Your stress, oh my goodness, impacts your skin significantly. So there's a number of things that is impacting how our skin looks and impacting our bodies in general. But the reality is skin changes. As you get older, it changes. And particularly for women, then you have perimenopause, you have menopause, and then there's pre-perimenopause. That's the one I'm making up. Pre-perimenopause, meaning anything before perimenopause, where you're not in perimenopause, but you are kind of like aging. And so you're going closer and closer to that a part of your life. There's changes that are constantly happening. And so understanding your skin is not about necessarily always what I need today. Yes, there might be concerns you're trying to address now, ngoko, manje, but it's also about knowing what to expect, what your skin might be telling you, what your body might be telling you, and how to, kind of address those as things change over time. When we talk about skin thickness, Asians, they tend to have a thicker dermis, which is that second layer of skin. They have more collagen producing cells. Okay, now this is the one that like the rest of us are like scrambling to get more collagen in there, more elastin. No, they have more collagen producing cells. And that is why these collagen producing cells helps to preserve their skin elasticity for much longer. So for example, I actually read one of the stats in the papers was saying this is why you'll tend to see Asians, like if you put Asians in a study and you do exactly the same thing, which is like expose them to the sun for maybe like, let's say 30 minutes per day with no protection, a Caucasian person will start to show signs of aging or the repercussions of that exposure quite soon. So let's say like in a year or like in a couple of months or whatever the case is. But with Asians, it will show in like 10, 15, 20 years. That's because they have more collagen producing cells. And so their signs of aging aren't as visible. And so you won't see as many wrinkles on them, their sagging skin. Eventually, they all get there, okay? Because we all get there. Eventually, we all get to the same place. But it takes them a little bit longer for that to really show. And so it's only when they start to like get to those bigger ages that you start to go, oh, there's the wrinkles and there's the, but I found that to be very interesting. Asians, similar to people of darker skin tones like black people, must be very careful of post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. Some of the causes of this could be acne, it could be eczema, it could be trauma from an injury to the skin, which sometimes can lead to keloids. In fact, Asians will tend to have worse types of keloids than black people, though, because their skin is even more sensitive. And then it might also be from dermatological procedures. It might also be from laser. Okay, certain lasers and other light sources could result in post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. So this is something very important that, like, if you are going to be getting a particular treatment, make sure you're getting it from someone who understands your skin type. Okay, not just your skin types in terms of is it oily, dry skin, but also understands like, they've dealt with people with black skin. I was so lucky that when I went to Asia and I had my first skin treatment, I had it in Thailand, and this lady sat down with me for a good 30 minutes and she was like, listen, you do not have to do anything today. I ended up not doing the treatment. I ended up doing a facial instead. But that was because she sat me down. She said, you do not have to do anything today. And that's something you don't always get from people, because most other places that I've been to before, it's almost kind of like you've got to leave here having spent money. Do you know what I mean? But I appreciated that for her. She was like, no, I want you to sit down and I want us to talk about what this laser treatment does. And literally, after she explained, she was like, these are my concerns. My concerns are for Black people. There tends to be these results. She was like, now, obviously, for you, it might not be the same. It's not a one blanket approach, but she was like, I just want you to know that some of the results have resulted in this, that. And we see that mostly in Black people. So I just want you to know that if you're going to choose this, there is a risk here. And then she even explained that, like, if I do end up choosing it, here's what she would do differently than if I was like a Caucasian person, is that she would use lower, she explained it in the jargon, lower this and lower that and blah, blah, blah. So make sure that you are going for skin treatments somewhere where people not only are professional and it looks professional, but they understand Black skin. Because if they don't understand what could go wrong and they're not cautious and they only just like making money, and then you'll be out here like my scars, trying to buy every product on the market. Be careful. So darker skinned people will have a stronger skin barrier. So that's why our skin is a little bit more moisturized as a natural function of our skin barrier. Caucasians will have a weaker skin barrier, but I think Asians have the weakest skin barrier. This is why in Asia they focus so much on hydration. Weaker skin barrier means you are likely to be losing a lot more water, so your skin becomes drier, flaky, scaly skin, and a number of other issues. Yes, Asian skin also has lower natural moisturizing levels as compared to African skin and Caucasian skin. African skin tends to have a greater chance of sensitivity, more prone to scarring from acne and cuts. So the thickness makes for stubborn scars. And so the melanin skin is great for sun protection, but skin injuries will lead to more visible scars that are more visible. And also this inflammation from acne can cause skin to release more. So when the skin gets hurt, it's not only when you expose it to the sun that it creates more melanin, it's also when the skin is hurt, and that could be from scarring, acne scarring, injuries, whatever the case may be. Then the skin creates more melanin in that area to protect it. And so some of that post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation is something that comes up. And it sometimes also can lead to keloids on areas of the body where there is more melanin. So it's almost like the cycle where like the melanin keeps creating. You guys are trying to fight it. And yeah, use products that are good for sensitive skin, i.e. gentler, milder products. There's this trend around like something trying to use products with the highest amount of certain ingredients. And yes, while it may be great to try and use products with like 15, 20% niacinamide and like, I'm obviously making this up. I don't know any products with 20% niacinamide, but like, 20% niacinamide, 20% vitamin C, like the higher the better because you want everything to get fixed overnight. That I caution you guys, like, because you may be prone to more sensitivity, the stinging that people think is like someone say to me, when a product stings, that's when I think it's working. The products shouldn't sting you, okay? Unless something like, let's say, microneedling, which is supposed to feel like a little bit of like sensation, but when you're putting on your normal moisturizer, it shouldn't sting you. When you're washing your face with a cleanser, it shouldn't sting you. When you're putting on a toner, and this is something I had to learn the hard way because I used to use a very harsh toner on my skin and it would kind of like, there'd be a little bit of like stinging sensation, but like an uncomfortable stinging sensation every time I was using my toner. And I thought to myself, oh, it's working. It means it's doing something. No, it was stripping my skin and of its natural oils, and that was not a good thing. So I know everybody thinks the more sensation there is, it means the product is working. That is not the case. Your products are not supposed to sting you in that way unless you're doing a treatment or like you're using a VT Riedel shot, which even then it's not like a burning sensation or anything. It's like a literal slight sensation of like the little micron tuntunis in the microneedle, in the VT reader. But ultimately, we should be cautious to be using products that are gentle and mild. When you're exfoliating, it shouldn't hurt. It should be gentle and mild. Gentle and mild, yes, may take longer for you to get rid of some of those scars. You have to, it's a process. So you might have to go the slightly longer route, but what you don't want is to be using such harsh products on your skin today because you're looking for an immediate outcome, such that 5 years from now, you now have to go and pay thousands elsewhere to go and get treatments to fix something that like shouldn't have even been an issue, right? Or 5 years from now, you're now stuck with like other issues on your skin that you can't now fix. So chonchoni, you know what I mean, guys? Let's take it slowly. Chonchoni, chonchoni. So moral of the story, gentle, mild products that are safe for sensitive skin. Last but not least was the topic around sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about melanin. We've talked a little bit about some water retention, a little bit. We've talked about skin barrier. We've talked about the different layers of skin. Now, lastly, I'm going to touch on sebaceous glands, which this was quite an interesting one because I had to read a number of varying studies, and some of them weren't particularly, there were consistent pieces, and then there was some where there was a little bit of inconsistency. Some of them were expected things, and then some of them were slightly unexpected. There is a suggestion from the studies that I read that there is a huge difference in sebum production within various ethnic groups, as well as by gender, traditional gender split. Some studies found that Black people have higher sebum levels and more sebaceous glands than white people. Now, sebum is the skin's natural oils that protect the skin. Okay, so this is, sebaceous levels are good. Like sebum oil is good. It protects our skin, it keeps it moisturized, but it keeps it moisturized. Sebaceous glands are oil glands that are connected to our follicles, and your hair follicles are found inside of your pores. So inside your pore, if you think about what a pore looks like, inside of your pore is this hair follicle. Your oil glands are connected to the hair follicle, and then the sebum oil is created in the glands, and then it moves up, kind of gets transported through this hair follicle, and then comes out of the pores. It has also been found that Black people have higher pore count. So not only do we have more oil levels, we also have more sebaceous glands. We also have more pores. And pores don't go away. You can minimize how they appear, i.e., like when you're looking at yourself really up close, can you see them all? Are they all staring at you? Or you can minimize them so that they don't, They're not as visible, but you can't take them away completely. Okay, so if anybody's like, oh, buy the skincare product, it removes pores, you're not removing your pores. Okay, your pores are not removed. They're minimized, but they're not removed. So just know that. So pore care, if you're somebody who has enlarged pores, and I actually know that I have a lot of pores. When I did my skin analysis, they were like, girl, you got pores for days. So pore care is going to always be a part of my routine as a result. Okay, so what does this mean for Black people? It does mean that because there is a benefit to sebum, um, our skin is a little bit more moisturized, which is what I mentioned earlier. However, it does mean that there is a higher possibility or a likelihood rather that some of us may have an overproduction of sebum, so excess sebum. And what that leads to is having oily skin, and that can, of course, lead to acne as well. And then, of course, this was expected, which is that some of the papers found that men tend to have higher sebum production than women due to hormonal differences. Not unexpected because testosterone is one of the oil production related hormones. And so for women, testosterone is highest for us during ovulation, whereas for men, of course, they have a far higher testosterone level. Testosterone basically stimulates the sebaceous glands. So men have more active glands than we do, which is not unexpected. Oh, okay. Two interesting facts that I found. In fact, the first one is more interesting, which was the level of sebum secretion, so the amount of sebum coming out of your pores on the forehead rises during the early decades. So when you are in those first couple of decades, teens, early 20s, 30s, 40s, in the first 2 decades, it's rising. It peaks in the 30s and 40s. This is for men, I think, mostly. And then it declines, which also makes sense why in your teens, you have a lot more oil, acne. In your 20s, you might still be suffering with it. And then in your 30s and your 40s, even then as well, you might still be dealing with some stuff. But one of the things I found, I was like, actually, come to think of it, a lot of people like who are in their 50s, 60s, a lot of people have really good skin in their 50s, 60s. It's actually quite interesting. And yes, I have met a lot of people who don't have good skin, but like if I think about super old people, like think about your grandmother and your grandfather. Their skin is popping. I mean, maybe it's not like super radiant all the time, but I do find that as they get older, their skin pops. Now, that is interesting because technically your skin gets drier as you get older. Like this is just a natural process for everyone, regardless of ethnicity, race, or whatever. Our skin gets drier as we get older. But I do find that in terms of um, things like acne, particularly excess oil related concerns, that older people seem to not have those issues, at least from first glance. Now, this is not a tested theory. This is me just observing, and it could just be certain people around me. It could be that black don't crack situation. It could be a number of things. But yeah, African Americans had the highest sebum creation in the T-zone, followed by Asians, and the lowest was Hispanics. And this was an American study. One other thing is studies have also shown that African skin has larger, okay, I want to pronounce this right. African skin has larger mast cell granules, which may be linked to increased sensitivity and to allergens and potential for inflammatory reactions. This is in African skin. I'm assuming that was an African American skin because that was the same study as the previous fact. Now, what that means is like this is one of the reasons specifically again I mentioned why I prefer Korean skincare, because there isn't a lot of studies that have been done in Africa specifically. And if you think about Africa, it's a huge continent. Every country will also be different because there's environmental factors, there's lifestyle factors, there's a bunch of things that go into skin. And so there isn't enough research and data on Africa, particularly as it relates to skin, and even to skincare. And so obviously we borrow and learn a little bit from the studies that have been done on African Americans, because African Americans by definition are of African descent. Um, However, very different, very, very different. So the results may look different. But one of the reasons why I say I prefer Korean skincare is with all that I now know from the research I've done, is that there is a potential that as Africans, our skin is a little bit more sensitive. And so if I can have the option of using more sensitive ingredients, more sensitive ingredients that are more suitable for sensitive skin, then I would rather do that. And if I compare what I use now from my Korean skincare routine versus my old routine, which did have a lot of harsh ingredients because I was trying to deal with all these things and like trying to get all my concerns sorted out overnight. It is like night and day. I feel like now I can wake up and my skin, even without doing my skincare routine, already just looks more pleasing to me. Um, I'm having less issues with itchy skin and that kind of stuff. Now, this is not to say that Western products aren't necessarily. I think there has been some really good companies and brands that have done well from a sensitivity perspective. I think La Roche-Posay is one of them. Um, what's the one that I use as a cleanser? Cetaphil is one of them. Really good brand. I like it, but only for the cleanser. I don't use anything else by them. I mainly only use the cleanser. So there's brands that are doing really well. All I'm saying is that like for my serums and toners and essences and just, currently my cream as well. I think the only thing at the moment that I use that is not Korean is my cleanser because I use Cetaphil, but everything else I'm using Korean skincare. And then maybe besides the ordinary glycolic acid is what I use for my evening toner occasionally when I want to exfoliate. But yeah, everything else is pretty much Asian. My body care is pretty much Asian, with the exception of Vaseline, because yeah, Unilever is not Asian, even though the products are only in Asia, it's not Asian, right? But yeah, for the most part, I use their skincare because I really do appreciate how cognizant of sensitivity they are. Okay, last but not least, still within sebaceous glands is African skin can appear, although our skin is a little bit more moisturized naturally than other skin, it can appear to be more textured. There is also a little bit of prevalence. Now this is a different study where I didn't find this in any of the other studies, and it could be just because they focused on different things, but there was a study that showed that there's prevalence in African skin for skin diseases like eczema, psoriasis, and that kind of stuff. So, and this is interesting because a lot of the people I've spoken to just previously around skincare, as I was doing research, a lot of people have said, dude, if you can help find products that are really good for things like eczema and just like skin conditions, that would be really great. It is something that I'm quite curious about, is eczema. So anyway, and a number of other skin conditions, of course. Skin is interesting. Our skin is not all the same, however. We all should be moisturizing. We should all be putting on SPF. We should all be cleansing our skin. Just this is helpful to know what else to consider, what to think about when we're thinking about treatments, what to think about when we're buying products, what to think about when we're just watching our skin, observing it and learning it. So yes, that is all from me. That is all from Jenny's Self-Care Lab. I hope this was helpful to somebody. I hope it was interesting. Drop your comments in the comment section. Like, follow, share, subscribe, the whole shebang. And I hope to see you guys next week. 안녕.